Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to the final day of the CFO Connect Summit. We hope you've had a wonderful time so far. Lots of interesting panels, lots of interesting people. For today, we are very excited to speak about change and crisis management, particularly leadership lessons that we've gained from an unusual year. My name is Jane. I'm a reporter for CFO Dive, which is a daily finance and business newsletter based out of Washington, D.C. In the U.S. And I am so excited to be joined this morning or this afternoon by Edward Rose, who's the CFO of Glovo, and Chris Bordeaux, who is the former CFO of Miro and current group CFO of Bird. I'll hand it off to Edward and Chris to do some short introductions, and then we'll get started.
Perfect. I'll start, Chris, if that's okay. Jane, thanks so much for the introduction, and first, thanks for the organization for inviting me to this event. I think it's great to see all these many people connected here. So hopefully, it's going to be exciting and interesting for everybody. As a quick background, as you see, I'm leading finance at Glovo. I joined the company in 2017, so it's been already 4 years there when the Glovo was a company that was mainly Spanish. We were in Spain, Italy, and Portugal. Today we are in 23 markets. It's a company that has been expanding to many places, not only on countries, but also on business units. From food, Glovo today can deliver also groceries, pharmacies, flowers, anything that we can fit into the box. It's been a real, I would say, very exciting roller coaster trip over the last 4 years. A lot of ups and downs. That last year with the COVID, I think we got to the top of the of the excitement, I would say, and then things happening at the same time. So very happy today, to give you a bit of background of what we did during this period of time.
I guess I'm up. I'm Chris. First of all, thanks for having me, and same as Edward, I'll try to make this interesting for everyone that's connected. Quick background: I'm currently the CFO of Bird Technologies, so not the electric scooter, but the e-commerce fulfillment company based in Berlin. But what we're going to be talking about now is crisis management back in 2020, and that's when I was group CFO of Miro. Miro, very shortly, is a photographic content production company, the world leader in that segment. It's based in Paris with operations pretty much all over the world. Same as Edward, we had a pretty crazy phase. I joined Miro in late 2018, had an extremely aggressive growth year in 2019, and then came the annus horribilis of 2020, which was the year of the COVID, which had a pretty important impact on Miro's operations, and that's what we're going to be talking about.
Definitely. Thank you both so much for those brief introductions. Everyone, we're very lucky to be able to hear from two individuals who are leading companies or throughout the pandemic have led companies coming from very different places and with very different experiences. So the name of this panel being Change and Crisis Management really does go to show the ways in which CFOs have been challenged in the past year. Regardless of which industry you're in, there's been an enormous sea change in what to expect. Forecasting has become essentially impossible, and being able to close the books remotely, all these things have posed challenges that are completely unlike anything that has ever happened in the C-suite before. I know for myself as a journalist, I've spoken to CFOs across industries, across public companies, small family-owned businesses, CFOs in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, all who can kind of come together and say, even if their company experienced much increased demand, managing that and being able to scale that kind of success and make it sustainable is an issue of its own. So no one really has emerged from the past 18 months feeling as completely as secure as they may have been going into it. Though, of course, there are lessons that they may have learned from the end of it. So it's going to be really interesting today to be able to speak to Edward and Chris about just what they've learned and what their experience has been. So with that in mind, feel free to put questions in as we get going. Feel free to tell us where you're coming in from and any questions you might have for Edward and Chris relating to the nation they were in and how that impacted things. Anything you think, we'll be taking a look at audience questions throughout and eager to hear what you think. But just to kick us off in a very broad way, because Glovo and Miro are such different companies and operate in pretty different industries and take up different spaces in there, I wanted to pose first to Edward and then to Chris, what were the most pressing challenges that Glovo and Miro faced during the pandemic, and how did you work to meet them?
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Yeah, I think the word for me was uncertainty. There was a moment at the end of the second half of March that actually at that moment we were around in around 20, 25 markets at that moment. And we started to see different realities in different markets. And it was a bit weird because in our case, we were as you know, we're in Spain and Italy. Those are one of the two biggest markets where we are. And Italy was going ahead of us like 1 or 2 weeks in terms of COVID and people getting into lockdowns and so on. So you could feel and experience what was happening there. But as your real life was still not changing, because our lives have changed a lot over the last 18 months, and we were doing normal lives, still no masks, the restrictions were pretty limited in Spain. You were thinking, okay, it's something that maybe it's not going to be so tough, and the reality, I think, impacted all of us very severely. In our case, the uncertainty came from different things. One is regulation. We are a regulated industry in the sense that we didn't know if restaurants were able to open or not. We didn't know if the couriers were allowed to go into the streets to deliver the orders that they needed to do. So all of those things were changing, I would say, on a day-by-day basis, and you were just waiting to listen what the governments were doing in the different markets. And we had a lot of different experience from markets that were completely shut down, so no revenues, nothing was happening there, to other markets that were a bit more open and not more or less you could survive. The biggest reality for us is that we could differentiate, especially the first month, April, versus the rest, because on the first month, no one was prepared. Restaurants were not prepared. The delivery platforms like Glovo were not prepared. Couriers were not prepared. Nobody was prepared for what was happening. And actually what we faced is that most of our restaurants, which is the biggest part of what we do today, they were completely shut down. So no orders. And the other thing was happening. People was at home, and the closest reality that they could have to their previous life, it was through platforms like Glovo. Because if they wanted to order from a restaurant, if you wanted to order from a grocery store, or even from other merchants, you could do it through Glovo. But they were accessing the app, and there was no content there because the restaurants were shut down. And this was especially with the severe impact on April. This affected, obviously, a lot of our matters in the finance department, from forecasting sales and how much we were going to do, having to work on weekly, plans on cash forecasts, cash constraints. At that moment, you didn't know what was going to happen. So all of us, we got into a cash preservation. So let's reduce as much as possible we do, because we don't know what is going to happen with the world. And the next window that you had, it was probably, until next Sunday or next Monday that the government was announcing what to do. And neither the governments were really knowing what they needed to do. So obviously everybody, were living on this. So we got into a very, very short-term forecast basis, and the teams, they were working, I would say, 24/7 from home, obviously. And we got into this mode of just looking at first week by week and then month by month. And then from May, June, the things started to be a bit more, I would say, not coming back to reality, but restaurants, they said, look, the only way that I had to, to still have my employees and have revenues is to open. And same happened with a lot of different partners or merchants that we work on. This was started to come, a bit more to normality. So we faced at the beginning a lot of constraints. Later down the road, I must say, obviously, for sectors or industries like the delivery, even it's food deliveries, groceries delivery, it's whatever, it's e-commerces. Obviously, this has helped us to boost a lot of growth during the last year. Okay, and this has been a tremendous lever that has allowed us to get a lot of new customers, a lot of new merchants into the platform. And taking the fact that obviously we never wanted to have a pandemic in order to, for us to grow, this has had a positive effects on the adoption of people of platforms like Global. So a lot of learnings from the team and a lot of growth that we have accelerated since, I would say, May, June last year.
Fantastic. Thank you, Edward. Chris, same question is, what were the most pressing challenges that Miro faced during the pandemic? And in those moments, how did you meet them?
Yeah, I guess the first couple of months we were in a very similar situation to Edward and to basically the entire economy, of being, come March, you have zero visibility, so you just freeze everything, lock up the bank account, and start managing your cash as much as you can. I think that was the knee-jerk reaction that everyone in the market had. Except that then the long tail of the COVID effect was very different for e-commerce or for fulfillment or delivery companies than it was for us. Maybe a bit of background on the situation at Miro. So in 2019, we had an extremely aggressive expansion year. We did a pretty massive fundraising in August 2019, so with very ambitious growth targets. And so 2019 was all about building up a structure, a global structure, opening offices in Singapore, in India, in Japan, in Brazil, scaling up the US, scaling up Europe. All of that basically exposed us to a very high degree to the revenue that we were forecasting into our revenue forecast. Now, in late 2019, we were starting to start looking more critically at this spend that we were very aggressively increasing on our P&L, and already starting to have conversations and thoughts about restructuring and rationalizing sort of that aggressiveness. And so that was a starting point just a couple of months before the COVID hit, and then the pandemic really hit in the month of March, and so that basically triggered a lot of reflection, and beyond the first couple of months where it was just panic and knee-jerk reactions, that actually allowed us to go further in those conversations and really decide what expense is necessary and what expense is superfluous. Basically to tell you how exposed we were to and how the pandemic impacted our revenue, we were maybe a third of our revenue was on the travel business, so that was gone, and there was no visibility as to when that was coming back. Not even in mid 2020, late 2020, even now, there's no real visibility on when the travel industry is going to get back to its pre-COVID state. So that's one chunk of revenue that's gone and where there's no visibility of when it's going to come back. Another, maybe less than a third, but a large chunk of our revenue was in South America. And although a lot of it came from food delivery platforms such as Rappi, such as Uber Eats, etc., it remains Miro's business is still targets marketing budgets, which is photographic content creation, making your site more consistent, making it more beautiful, increasing the conversion, and all of that spend, all of that effort that platforms put into their marketing. That is one of the first things that gets scrutinized and that gets canceled or postponed when there's a down cycle, be it a pandemic or be it any other reason for a down cycle. So all of South America, although delivery was picking up, etc., all of the marketing spend was completely cut. So we lost another large chunk of our revenue. And so basically, after the first couple of months of freezing all the expenses, the big question mark for Miro was, when is it picking up? We have built a huge cost structure and a global operating structure to deliver large volumes of photography and of photo shoots throughout the world. Which pieces of that structure do we need to keep alive in order to be able to operate in the future when business picks up again? And what can we get rid of, basically, because we had zero visibility on when business was going to pick up again. So that was the biggest challenge I think we had for a company where You knew that things were going to pick up at some point because people will always need photo content at some point. But you're in a down cycle. Some segments are picking up, like food delivery. So we pivoted towards food delivery. That was one of the big learnings. We pivoted towards other new business segments. But the big challenge was what do we cut and what is really business critical for the future.
Definitely. Thank you, Chris, for going through that and for explaining. Of course, it is a vital thing to understand about the pandemic was that there was, no matter where you were living or what industry you were in, there were a lot of delayed promises of, oh, we'll be at this point in 6 months, or this we'll be fully past this in a year, or what have you. And we're still pretty much in it. Regardless of where we are, things are not really back to normal in any sense. So making sure to plan around that and to try and contingency plan, no question, must be a really difficult task, particularly when you're in charge of the budgeting and the finances. So I appreciate you going through that. So the next question is, I wanted to ask whether there are any ways after this 18-month period that totally changed the way many people approached work and running their businesses, whether Edward or Chris, either of you have permanently altered your company's strategies or operations in response to the pandemic? Anything that you changed and thought would be temporary, but you've ended up keeping?
You mean on the probably on the way that we work, and obviously I think that's something that all of us here in this session we're suffering or we are experiencing is if we're working from home or we're coming back to the offices and we're seeing different companies doing different strategies. And just one reflection here at the beginning, I think all of us, we there was a moment that a lot of the companies would say working from home is possible. So it's not that people needs to be tied into the office in a chair and come at 9 a.m. and leave at at 5 or 6 p.m. in the afternoon. So especially a lot of the traditional companies understood that this could change, and people is if you put them at home, they work, and the output is there, and then things don't stop. So this was a real change for, I would say, for most of the companies out there. For us, probably for Bert or for Globo, we were probably used to. For us, it's taking the computer, going home, and working from that. So it wasn't really changed because our systems are prepared already to work in the digital world. So it was probably easier for all of us. What I think we found out is that we don't need to be in the office every day to keep getting things. We are productive working from home because maybe you can focus more on things that before you had distractions, or it was a bit more difficult to do, or too many meetings that happening in the office environment. And what we're seeing today is that also 100% work from home, maybe it has some challenges. It really depends a lot on the type of job that you do, and that is something. If you are an engineer, you are something a bit more technician, or you are working in other departments where you really need to work with other people, it really changes. So generalizing, it's normally very difficult. And as companies, sometimes we need to differentiate or to see what is the strategy that we need to do. And here at Globo, we still are defining what to do. We know that 100% one way or the other is not the way to go. So we are setting, some minimum days to come to the office because we see a lot of pros and cons, on being together and socializing, on even, passing by the corridor and meeting someone that you haven't seen over the last 12 months, and suddenly there is an idea or something that I wanted to tell you, and we need to work on that. All of these intangibles that from home via messaging, Slack or email are a bit more difficult. We find it there. So this has changed. Really, this has changed as the way that we work, and I think we are more productive in some ways, and there are ways that we're still learning how to do the process. But we understand that you don't need to be physically in the office to do everything that you do. And even working on schedules or in Globo, actually, we are pretty flexible on this, and we're not asking, you need to be at 8 or 9 a.m. in the office. It's up to everybody. You have your goals, you have your OKR, so you need to accomplish them, and obviously that's what we're following up, and that's probably the one of the learnings. The other, I would say, is more that we have people that is a bit more prepared for uncertainty and for the worst. We had the worst a year ago. It happened. We survived this. It was tough, But now I think people is a bit more cautious. Every time that you need to contract a new supplier or you need to renegotiate something, you're also thinking, okay, what is the long-term effect or the mid-term effect of all of this? And I think this mindset, at least here, it's there, and you see it, and everybody, every time that because we needed, as Chris was saying before, we needed to look at every cost line and see this is necessary or not. And at the moment that we did that, and you had to call a supplier, a provider, I'm sorry, we're cutting out or we're terminating. That's not easy to do, okay, and that's not something that anyone wants to do, or we need to do a saving. So everybody now is super concerned about this, and it's something that I think we are more prepared, and also we are also more prepared to act on the short term. And it's like people is thinking on the longer term, but we need to be prepared that something happens. I can switch on and off certain things, and things are continuing. Those are a bit of the things that that I think we're still in this phase of permanently. I think permanently it's still a word that I'll challenge it in the future. Let's see what happens, because it's still in the work from home office. I don't think still that we have gotten into a conclusion as companies, but we'll see in the coming months or years what really happens.
Yeah, I think going back to the question you asked, Jane, I think the question was what permanently changed in terms of strategies and operations. So at Miro, there's really two things that changed. First, on the strategy, we had I guess for a delivery company like Glovo, the strategy, once the first shock is gone, you see that delivery is picking up and really lifting off. Because people can't go to the restaurant anymore, so that just allows you to accelerate more. And what you've just said, for Miro, there was it was a huge question mark as to what segments to address. So yes, it permanently changed the strategy in terms of the travel industry being on its knees, basically. So we completely scrapped that, and all of the little operating habits that we had to serve that industry, those were sort of put on ice and kept in a box for later. And we really focused on the segments that actually worked in a pandemic situation. So food delivery clients became from one day to the next our biggest revenue driver. Uber Eats, Deliveroo, Glovo, etc. Those were the clients that were really picking up. And since we were missing a chunk of revenue, we had to basically pivot towards other new initiatives and e-commerce, shooting e-commerce retail, basically shooting collections of goods that are being sold online, not only sending photographers to restaurants and asking them to take pictures, but actually receiving goods from retailers and doing photo shoots. That's another business line that we started testing out and that we had to put in place very quickly. So what I'm saying is, in terms of strategy, it's allowed us to address a lot of new markets and select them with a lot more urgency than in the past, where we were just trying out a couple of things, like trying out weddings, trying out new products on those segments. It really allowed us to focus very specifically on the market segments that were going well. It also sort of forced us to refocus all of our efforts on very strategic clients and forget about trying to onboard the long tail of clients, the mid-market platforms, which were always complicated clients that were requiring a lot of effort in terms of sales, in terms of onboarding, in terms of getting operations running. All of that, which creates value in the long run, but is not generating quick and easy revenue. All of that was again set aside, and that the pandemic really allowed us to focus our efforts on what was critical and on things that were creating the most value the more easily. Then on an operations side, I guess everyone reinvented the way they worked with the working from home, putting up new communication channels, etc. For a company that's fairly young and that's basically inventing its operating model as they go along, I have to say that it's fairly critical to have people coming to maybe not coming to the office, but having social interactions. And so I think at Miro, right when I left, we were starting to get people coming back to the office to avoid lapses of communication when you've got a new client that you're trying to onboard and that you're trying to service with a very, very high level of quality, you need to have a lot of a lot of interaction between the teams that are managing those clients, and that's something that requires physical presence at some point, or at least that's a lot more challenging when there's no physical presence. So that's on the operations side.
Yeah, we'll talk more about physical presence down the line for sure, because I know it's a hot button topic for many CFOs. But I quickly want to add in, we have a question from Mohammed, and he wants to know what was your business, or namely the board, expecting from you when the pandemic was happening? In what ways were they kind of putting you on the spot?
So yeah, again, the first 3 months was a bit panic mode. We were basically reporting to the board on a bi-monthly basis, telling them what the initiatives were. And a lot of our workforce was in France, so the French government was offering a lot of options to put people on furlough, keep them with their I don't remember exactly, but I think 80% of their salary. But you could put very large populations on furlough without having to expense anything on your end, or anything that could be done in order to save cash. That was very critical to the board, and giving constant updates and real-time updates on which markets were struggling, which markets were coming out of the tunnel, which markets were still doing good. We were actually still, the bit of business that we were still doing was in Southeast Asia. So we had some good news to report on that front, because for some reason, Southeast Asia is more used to it. They had the SARS issues a decade ago. So they were used to managing health situations better than Europe, better than South and North America, at least. So business was still doing good there. So that's the sort of information that they wanted to hear from us. What are we doing on the markets that are not working? How actively are we preserving the cash? And what are we doing on the markets that are still sort of working? And what are the options for the future? What are we working on to make sure that we don't miss any opportunities once the situation goes back to normal? But yeah, it was really constant communication, and just a lot of reassuring on our end to show them that nobody's prepared for this. It's a tough situation, and we're losing money at the moment, but we're actually taking control and being proactive about finding solutions in the short run.
Yep, very similar to what Chris said. We also were reporting on a bi-monthly basis, and cash preservation was probably the word, and looking at every opportunity from this in Spain. You also had a similar framework that in France there were these temporary dismissals that you were paying a very low amount and people was at home. Those are solutions, and probably one of the toughest ones that we needed to take during this period of time. The other was also looking at financing options. So in Europe, at least, there was a lot of the governments. They were launching a lot of financing, soft loans and similar subsidies, similar programs that we were trying also to gather. And the rest is trying to see what was the cash forecast and how the markets were performing. In our case, it was during April. It was 4 weeks that it was crazy, and then we started to see actually how things were picking up. We were lucky, obviously, because we are in an industry that people was at home and was still demanding us. So our experience, I would say, it was hard. It was easier than much other industries, like for instance travel, as you put an example, that went to zero radically from one day to the other. And the other is that also the board had a lot of they are normally investors coming from VCs or similar, that they had a lot of startups that they have invested in. So the portfolio, they could see a lot of experiences, and then there was a lot of this is happening there, why you do the same. There was a lot of interactions with them, because they wanted us to be on top of everything that they wanted to do. And then from May, I would say also we started to see how the markets, they were starting to open also for financing. So investors, they were starting to again put money into the companies, and in our case it also became apparent that we could go and raise money. There was a liquidity in the markets. The share price of similar companies that we have on the stock exchange listing, they were also performing really well, and people was very bullish about the opportunity. So the board, there was a moment also that was pushing us also to go and fundraise because there was an opportunity there. So we saw the dark side and also the light side in just a matter of weeks.
Yeah, what we weren't offering the board, and that was very clear from the beginning onwards, was a long-term revenue forecast on our end. We basically told them, after 1 week of panic, we told them, okay, we're not forecasting revenue anymore. We're forecasting, we know what our fixed costs are, and that's what we're working on. But revenue, EBITDA, nobody can tell.
I agree.
If things pick up in one country, they're going to stop from one day to the next in another, and so there's no way in even trying to be accurate about forecasting revenue, at least during 6 months. And then we started, from the ground up, forecasting client by client, country by country, etc. And that things gradually came back to normal. But basically, yeah, there was a limbo where we weren't forecasting a full P&L, only a cost structure.
Thank you both for taking that question. Then we're next going to move into, as promised, a discussion on remote work. I wanted to ask, and we have an audience question that asks a similar question. I want to know whether most finance-related tasks you found were feasible to do remotely, or whether when it comes to finance, as opposed to other areas of the business, you really do think that in-person work would be vital. And that same question is kind of shared by one of our guests, Alana, who asks whether you've had to change any of your spending and expense processes with the team working remotely. So basically open-ended, what the remote work experience has been in terms of closing the books, in terms of leading a finance team, and which processes you've had to change, which have come easily, and whether you're aiming for yourself and your team to be back in person soon. Chris, you can start.
It's a bit twofold in my case. I think in general, finance related tasks can be fairly easily, at least a lot more easily than operations and logistics or whatnot. That those can be done remotely in a much more efficient way. I actually had two teams. One of them was the FP&A team, the analytics team, and they were super efficient working from home. They were entirely focused, and things would be done very fast, on time. It was picture perfect and everything. On the other side, I was just in the unluckily I was in the phase of bringing accounting in-house that year. And so I was just recruiting and basically building up from scratch an entire accounting team. And this team had a much harder time. They were scrambling to get information from the other departments, etc., because they basically arrived in a company that was working remotely, 90% remotely, had zero onboarding, zero presentation of other people, etc. And so for an accounting team, which is connected to the entire company, it was a huge struggle to get their bearings and to put the processes in place. The good thing is that they were starting from a blank page, so they went digital first and remote first from day one, and didn't have this entire change management cycle that other accounting team have to go through, trying to work remotely. But yeah, it's my FP&A team had been working together for over 2 years, and so they were relying on old social habits and background, whereas a team that is being structured in a full remote environment, they had a tougher time. But the upside was that they managed to put digital processes in place from the very beginning.
Yeah, only because I agree with Chris on most of the things. The only thing that I would add is also on the people that was joining our teams during this period of time, because there was in our case we continued hiring, although much less. We continued to hiring, especially people that was leaving or were replaced. The onboarding process was much harder because it's not the same, to go into the office and sit with the person that you're going to be working with and seeing what they are doing and trying to work better rather than being at home. and maybe by email or via video conference or via Slack, that they are telling what to do. And it's not the same that every time that you need to ask a question, the person is next to you, so you can ask your manager or your coworker what to do, instead of sending an email or calling or just sending a text message. It was harder for some people during a period of time. And that is something that we were working, and actually we work on better onboardings for people, because what happens is that they cannot be onboarded properly, they are not working properly, and then you have a person that is not fully working on what you need. The person is obviously not satisfied because they are not doing what they should be, and you don't have the output and the processes. So that is something that we also faced. For the rest of things, everything that is a very transactional, like accounting, or in our case we have financial operations, which is mainly billing, accounts payable, and so on. I think this was, if you have the systems in place, this was more or less okay, and people could continue doing it. For other things, like in our case, maybe FP&A and another more, that they are more in contact with other departments, with other people. It worked because everybody, as I said before, we got used to it. But it's sometimes, not meeting this person from, I don't know, from the marketing department, or from the other department that you can go and talk. This obviously created at some slowing some kind of decisions in that sense. But maybe in the office is easier to collect. But yeah, finance is a fairly sensible department that you can actually put it remote, and systems is very important to have the systems in place. In our case, we are building them and we are in that process. But that's I would say one of the big recommendations is like invest in good systems, because this is going to help a lot of manual work, and then obviously people can work from wherever they want, because the systems are going to be working properly. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you both for going into that. I know that's a very hot button topic across industries, across executives. But speaking of other C-suite executives, I wanted to ask whether, in this very difficult time, the ways in which you were able to collaborate with other key members of the C-suite to be able to deliver on your mission as best you could under very difficult and under difficult circumstances that you really would not ever have to be faced with in a normal business environment. So I was wondering whether there were other executives in your C-suite that you found it really integral to work closely with in order to remain as financially stable as possible and do your job as well as you can.
In our case, we were basically in full restructuring mode for the better part of 12 months between March 20 and March 21. It's hard to push a financial culture and to start cutting expenses here and there in a company that's growing and that has very aggressive targets. Those conversations, nobody wishes for that situation, but those conversations become a lot more easy and a lot more open when in a pandemic situation, because you see the world crumbling and the revenue not coming in, and so it makes everyone work in the same direction. So I had actually a lot more open and frank discussions with the rest of the C-suite, trying to restructure and trying to bring sanity to the cost structure, thanks to the pandemic. And again, it's not a situation you want to create or you want to put yourself in or you wish for, but it certainly made the interactions and the efforts much smoother, because everyone was super open. Everything was basically black and white about each line of expense that you were reviewing. Is it necessary? Is it creating revenue? Can it be cut? And those decisions were made in a much smoother way than when you're constantly haggling and thinking about maybe 6 months down the road, this is going to create value, etc., and we should invest in it now. Those discussions were a lot easier in this sense.
Yeah, in our case, I think it was we were always very transparent with the rest of the C-suite or the management team from the beginning. Even on things like cash and things like this, we were super transparent. So everybody, we could entitle and everybody on the things that we needed to do. That it was not a decision that was based. Okay, we can save a few bucks, so let's do the process. And obviously, everybody understood that it was an extraordinary situation that happened one day to the other. So in our case, it was there was a lot of collaboration, and people understood what we wanted to do. And even some things that before didn't require, and we're answering the question that I think Ilana was asking before, because I realized that I didn't answer. Even some approval processes that before there were some limits that it was a bit higher, so any C-suite level could approve themselves. We started to centralize it and have some kind of decision-making process where we accepting things or not, and the things that we didn't need, we were not doing that. And actually, it was a pretty good exercise because we took all the departments and we looked at all the costs that we were having there, except for payroll, that was another discussion, but all the providers and all the contractors that we have there, and we started to see, okay, are we using these or not? What are we doing? Can we renegotiate or not? And it was a super healthy exercise because we realized that there are lots of things that that could be that we were not using, or they were legacy from the past and nobody was looking at them. So there was a lot of cleanup process that was super useful. In our cases, especially the first 4 weeks, yes, we had a process that even myself or the CEO, we needed to approve new expenses. And there was a process that we were doing that in order to keep control on what we were doing, because we were going through a very harsh process on the other side, talking to all the providers and telling them, I'm sorry, we need to renegotiate or we need to terminate. And it was not fair for everybody. So we wanted to be on that side. And as we said, at the beginning, it was the emergency mode. So we need to stop, and anything that is not necessary, and then we'll continue.
Yeah, and even after, I mean, there was this very tough part where we were restructuring, but even after, when we had more positive conversations with everyone as a finance representative, that mentality of being ROI driven, of being cautious and reasonable and sensible about your expenses, that mentality sort of stuck and remained there, and it made the entire company aware that every dollar spent should be spent with a certain purpose, either to retain clients, to generate revenue, or to scale the business. And again, nobody wishes for that, but it's if there's a silver lining, is that everyone became not cost conscious, but conscious about the purpose of every dollar spent.
Definitely. Now, this might be an impossible question, but I figured, given that we're been in the pandemic for a year and a half at this point, we've really learned the parameters of what it's asked of your business. In retrospect, in a perfect world, could you point to ways that you could have made your companies better prepared for an event like the pandemic, or would that have not been possible and it would have caught you off guard regardless of any systems in place?
Edward, do you want to
I'm happy.
this up?
No, I think especially young companies like ours, probably Miro and for sure global. I think we were always on growth phases and opening more new offices, new countries, and going a bit further. And you don't have this mindset of crisis management. What happens if there is a crisis there or not? And you're learning through the mistakes that you're doing, actually. And that's the way that normally we do, and then we start to have a better and more robust processes and plans. What I think we could don't have better, I think, is having a crisis plan. Like, look, if something is happening and we need to shut down a market, or there are no more revenues, or what happens, having something more in place and say, okay, we're going to be looking at A, B, and C and analyzing that. It's very easy to say now because there was a pandemic. Now we need to think about any crisis or anything that can happen, and it can be, I don't know, now here in Spain we have a volcano, and there and things like this. But we need to have, as normally in security or IT, you have what happens if the system breaks down, and then you can move into another office and start working from there. So I think that we could have prevented in the past and say, okay, what would we do or not? And this is something that I think it's a good learning for the future. Maybe spending some time, because your day-to-day normally it's what you do, so it's very difficult to focus and say, okay, what things can happen and what we would do in those cases. And actually now in Global, we are preparing certain things on that sense. And this is something that, I think we could have done before. It was very difficult to predict that this was going to happen. It's I don't know anybody that had passed a crisis like this before, but that's maybe one of the areas. And the other, I think, it's thinking more about, for us, it's very important, the merchants, mainly restaurants and the couriers. Those are very two important stakeholders. and maybe have thought a bit more if things like this are happening, what we would do. And the case of couriers, for instance, that they get income from the orders that they are able to deliver. Those are things that maybe we could have thought in the past. What happens if, I don't know, we need to stop the service from one day to the other because these people at the end they are getting revenues from us. Same from restaurants. We saw that the working capital from restaurants in the vast majority of markets where we were, it was few days only. So it was really they were really lacking of funds, and they are living on by day. And things like this, maybe we could have thought before, how can we help our stakeholders to be in a safer situation tomorrow, in order if something happens that we could have. And those are things that actually we were thinking. Instead of thinking at that moment what we could do, we are now thinking more on proactively.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is ever prepared for a pandemic or for the situation we saw in March 2020. The alarm bell and the sort of reflex it created within finance organizations, I think, is to keep your structure as flexible as possible, because you as you're in growth mode, you're signing leases, you're hiring people, you're exposing yourself, and you're creating this very heavy structure of fixed costs, and so the lesson that I've learned and the mentality change also across all executives is that it's not being conservative and being anti-growth to have a mentality of keeping yourself keeping open door and exit options. When you're committing to a new market, when you're committing to a new product line or whatever, keeping flexibility in your cost structure, that's something that used to be before the pandemic frowned upon, because you had to be aggressive, you had to believe in the growth, you had to believe in your product, and if you didn't believe in your product and in the market opportunity and in your business plan, that just didn't encourage that created a bad vibe for the rest of the company, and it was sort of as I said, it was sort of frowned upon to think in this way. And now it's you can be aggressive, you can be pushing expansion and pushing growth while keeping yourself more options open. I think that's what makes companies nowadays more prepared for the future, for the rest. For what's coming next, compared to the way we were structured back in late 2019.
Definitely. That was a hard question, so I appreciate both of you giving honest answers. I'm keeping an eye on the clock here. We have like less than 3 minutes left, so I'm going to do a little quick lightning round of. I've been interviewing CFOs exclusively for over 2.5 years now, and whenever I talk to them, regardless of what industry they're in or what job they're doing or how things are going for their company, I always want to end our conversation by asking, what's something you really want other CFOs to know? We write to an audience of other CFOs, a jury of your peers. What have you learned on the job? What is something you figured out you would think would be really crucial or could be really helpful to another CFO out there? So I know you're in different countries, in different industries, have had such a different 18 months, but I think the question still holds. We're in a CFO conference here, CFOs from all over the world tuning in, of different companies, different businesses. What's something that if you could just make one piece of advice or one message, what would you want to say to another CFO?
Yeah, I think I'd stick to what I just said. It's keep flexibility in all the processes that you're putting in place. You want to be efficient, yet you don't want to create something that's unmovable. And I'm talking about processes and structure on the finance side, but also on your entire cost structure, to try to keep things as flexible as possible, because the revenue is always based on assumptions, and you're taking decisions as educated as possible, but revenue always is an assumption, whereas your cost structure and your fixed costs, they're not an assumption, they're there, and they're going to be there whether revenue comes in or not. So my advice and what I've really learned is to stay flexible, to stay adaptable, and grow at a speed that allows you to stem the growth, or to even reduce your cost structure as you go along, and not overcommit to fixed costs. Very basic.
No, that's. I'm gonna be a bit more broad, because financially, I think that's from a CFO, I think that's I wouldn't add more than this. I think that's super important from what we have lived over the last 18 months. Two things about the team for me. It's about culture of the team. This is super important, having very strong culture, even if we are CFOs and we think this is more for CEO to build. Having a very strong culture in the moments that there is crisis is where it really shows up, and that's super important. And I would encourage all of you to think about the culture, if you're working, and the values that you have in the company are the right ones or not. And the second is performance. Is having talented people in your teams. Actually, we can be CFOs, very good name and so on, but if you don't have talented people that is working with you on a day-to-day basis, things are not performing. So having your bar very high on hiring people, I think it saves a lot of time in the future. And I know sometimes we need to hire super fast and we need to do it. I've done that. And normally when you commit a mistake, you have lost a lot of time. So I would say talent and culture would be my two advices for everybody.
Fantastic. And right on time. Edward and Chris, this has absolutely flown by. I hope everyone watching and tuning in found their answers as insightful as I have. This has been an incredible session, change and crisis management from two fantastic leaders. But that will just about do it for us. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And of course, biggest thank you to Edward and Chris for taking time to talk with us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, my pleasure. Thank you, Jane, as well, for moderating.
Thank you. It was so much fun.